see the back of my hair now.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Committee of the Whole work session today, Tuesday, September 19th. We're starting here at about 10:37. And you can see on our agenda, we have our minutes from our last work session in August. And then to visit with us today is our assessor, Bob Thompson. And Bob is here today to talk about residential tax classification and tax forfeited property and give us a little update. So thank you for attending. We appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for having me. So, I think I'm the only one on the agenda, and the first thing is the residential tax classification, correct?
Correct.
Did everybody get a copy of that or
Yes,
have
we
it
did.
on their digital? Okay, so we spoke about this, last week. Right now, there are some lawmakers talking about consolidating the residential tax classifications. Currently, there are, depending on how you look at it, up to 18 different residential classifications that the assessor determines which one is appropriate for a given use, and those classifications come with different rates. Some pay into different pools, some pay into the local referenda tax, and some don't. So this has been a conversation in the group of assessors and lawmakers for many years. In fact, there was a report that I've referenced here back in 2007. There's a link to the report in the document where the lawmakers had actually asked the Department of Revenue to put together a study on the residential classification. They discussed a number of issues and a number of things of concern, and ultimately decided to make some recommendations and issue a memo out to county assessors, effectively trying to create some more uniformity in the residential classification applications. Then in 2017-18, and there may have been other bills, before this one, but there was a bill introduced during the 90th legislature, 2017-2018 session, House Floor 3276, which was titled Residential Classification Reform. The bill didn't pass, but effectively what it was aiming to do was to kind of consolidate some of those classifications and get it down to a smaller number of different options for the county assessors to apply to properties for their use. So, I put together this sheet. It kind of gives an overview of the situation. And the reason I did this is, I've had a number of questions just in the county here, and also at a meeting back in August with the Department of Revenue. John Klockziem, he's the director of the Property Tax Division, had mentioned that there was some, rumblings down in St. Paul. Some lawmakers were talking about taking a look at this again, this residential classification consolidation. And I just wanted the commissioners to be aware of it so that, if it comes up in a meeting or, if you hear AMC discussing it, that you had a little bit of background and kind of understand the potential implications to Cook County. One of the things that has been discussed a number of times is eliminating the seasonal recreational classification, which is what many of the cabins are classified. And if that was the case and they were to go into one of those residential classifications, they would then be paying into the local referenda tax, which, that would help the residents of Cook County, the homesteaders of Cook County, to kind of spread that burden across more properties. So there's a lot of information between the report and the bill. I was gonna attach the bill, but it was 30-some pages, so I decided I'd just include a link and send over a PDF of that. And if you guys have any questions or if it comes up down the road, you can certainly feel free to reach out. I also did kind of put together this pros and cons of the classification consolidation. There obviously would be winners and losers in different categories depending on what direction this consolidation might go. There are a number of things to consider, but it just kind of outlines some of those general obvious ones right there. And then on the last page, I did include, this is from a report that was prepared by the Department of Revenue. It's called the Property Values and Assessment Practices Report. And this just kind of shows something that we had been discussing over the last year or two in the group of assessors, where there's kind of been a shift. Commercial values haven't gone up as much as residential values have over the last, say, 3 years. And that's causing some of the levy burden to shift from commercial to those residential properties. So I just wanted to kind of add that in as an information point. And, I think that this residential classification consolidation, depending on how it's approached, could kind of alleviate some of that shift. So I included that as some additional information. I guess, is there any questions on this residential classification portion of it?
I had a question that a taxpayer emailed me, wondering what's the difference between non-homestead 1 to 3 units and non-homestead single unit?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So the non-homestead 4B1 is the 1 to 3 units. That classification is kind of a catch-all if it's not a homesteaded property, but say it's a long-term rental, it could fall into that category. If you have 3 units on the property, 2 units on the property, if it's a duplex or a triplex, it would automatically fall in that category. So when you look at the 4BB1 and it specifies single unit, well, now you have a scenario where a property could either go 4B1 or 4BB1, and there's quite a bit of different impact depending on which one it lands in. One thing that is specified in statute currently is that, say somebody was using their property as a cabin, and they've no longer are using it as a cabin. Let's say now they're renting it out as a long-term rental. Somebody's got a 12-year lease there. If that property was previously classified as seasonal, it cannot go into that 4BB1 classification. The statute defines, specifically says that a property cannot go from seasonal to 4BB1. So that's kind of an interesting one, and in fact, that very issue is actually addressed in this classification report from 2007. They'd actually, that was one of the topics that they discussed, is should that be eliminated from statute, this automatic elimination where those properties going from seasonal to residential can't go to 4BB1. And I can't speak to what the legislature intended when they created that law, but it has come up a couple of times when a property, I've seen it before where somebody had a cabin up north, and now maybe the son or daughter decides, I want to live up north. So, if they move in and for some reason they don't qualify for homestead, then it'd have to go to that 4B1 at the higher rate than the 4BB1, and people often ask, why is that? So it's all laid out in the statute and the Department of Revenue Property Tax Administrator's Manual. But effectively, those 4B1 properties are going to be anything that was previously seasonal under the same ownership. And the 4BB1 is going to be just that single unit, typically a long-term rental, but it could also be somebody's home, but not their homestead. Maybe they're living in Florida or another state, and this is kind of their winter, their snowbirds. So they don't qualify for homestead, but it's not technically not a seasonal recreational cabin property. That's oftentimes where a lot of people question, why did I end up at the 4B1 rate and not the 4BB1 rate, which has a lower tier for the first $500,000 of value? So I think that's a good question, and one of those issues that they've tried to address a number of times is this kind of inconsistency in the classifications of those properties. I know down in the Twin Cities there are a number of properties that fall into that 4BB1 category because they're single unit long-term rentals, and they were never considered a cabin. So if you have, there's these big corporations that buy single-family homes as an investment, they rent them out, and then eventually when the market is the right timing, they'll sell those for, typically it's going to be for a profit. And those properties are going to get that 4BB1 rate, the more beneficial of the two. When you look at a property up north, they're typically going to have been classified as a cabin at some point, and then they're automatically disqualified from the 4BB1 classification.
Okay, well, thanks for explaining that. I think it impacts a lot of people here in Cook County, whether they're residents, year-round or seasonal, and so thank you for addressing that.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Madam Chair, thank you. Am I remembering things right that, can you remind me just about our breakdown of our properties in Cook County as far as, isn't it like 70% of the homes are second homes or something like that? Or is that just 70% of the property is seasonal rec, or please remind me?
It's not quite 70%. In fact, after the short-term rental change, and I look at it based on a value standpoint, and I think we're close to 35-40% homestead of residential. So this is residential value. I think it's close to somewhere in the ballpark of 30% is seasonal recreational, and then another is about 30% residential non-homestead. So if you look at the homestead versus non-homestead alone, it's going to be 60-30 or 70-30, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah.
But a lot of them have switched away from that seasonal classification with the short-term rentals.
And the reason I wanted to ask and clarify or bring that up is because if we are talking about this simplified example, which is the second table there, which is the two, the homestead and the non-homestead, just to give some perspective, that's the impact for our schools is going to be so huge making that shift to non-homestead if they can contribute to the referendum. So it's just a wonderful opportunity for our community if we can.
And many other communities
Yes,
as well.
yes, absolutely. Any community with a school, say.
Yeah.
But I did bring this up with the hospital board, and I guess I was just wanting to check in with you too, just about the school levies versus hospital levies. I think their understanding was that they still collect on those seasonal rec properties. Is that?
So Brady would have a better idea of, so I do think that some of the school and some of the hospital levy is included in that county levy, the county effective, what the county levies. I'm not exactly sure, but I think some of their budget comes from the county portion of it. And then there are the voter approved referenda items, which those only get passed if the voters approve it.
Yeah. Okay.
And anything that's voter approved currently does not pay in on the seasonal properties.
Okay, thank you. I guess that was the distinction I didn't probably bring up with them, and so that's why they were saying
Yeah.
that way. So thank you.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Well, that's very, very exciting, I think, and impressive. And I hope, I'll certainly be talking about it with AMC, and
Yeah.
I just please keep us in the loop if there's action we can be taking or opportunities to help push this. But,
Be great for our community.
yeah. Just all of our homesteaded homes as well as, I'm thinking the schools and the hospitals.
Yeah, so it would certainly be a benefit to not only Cook County, but a lot of these counties up north where there's a lot of seasonal property. If you look at that kind of fact sheet that I put together, the state general fund, they do receive a little bit of property tax income or property tax revenue from these seasonal properties. And, that's something that I think it was first introduced in probably 2006, around there, the state general portion of the property tax levies. And, the state could stand to lose some money, but in the bigger picture of their, $25 billion levy, it's a drop in the ocean, what they collect from property taxes on seasonal properties. The portion that they collect on commercial properties is much larger, and even that has been looked at of, should they continue to collect property tax revenue from commercial properties as well. But I think the number there is about $41.6 million statewide is what the state's collecting on these seasonal rec properties. So it's less than 1%. It's actually less than 0.5%. So, and I will say that in our meeting with the Department of Revenue back in August, John Klock-Ziem kind of said, whenever there's a policy change, you kind of have to, take the glasses off and look at it through a new lens, because it's no longer, you can no longer say, well, this is normal, that this policy change is creating a new normal. So there will be some winners and some losers, and the Department of Revenue is fully acknowledging that they could potentially lose that state general tax collected on seasonal properties if that classification is eliminated.
Any other questions or comments? All right, well, let's take a minute then to look at tax forfeited lands.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so we have kind of had a couple of brief updates on this issue, but there was a Supreme Court ruling. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled in favor of Geraldine Tyler over Hennepin County. She had filed a lawsuit claiming that the county kept excess funds and that she was entitled to those funds above and beyond what was owed in back taxes and penalties and fees. So the Supreme Court made that ruling back in June. Since then, there's been a lot of talk about the future of tax forfeiture and how do we enforce property tax collections, and all of those things are going to have to be sorted out by our lawmakers down in St. Paul probably in the next session. And in the meantime, many counties have kind of either put on hold the disposition of tax forfeit properties, or if they are still selling the properties, they are setting aside any revenues above and beyond what was owed in back taxes, fees, and penalties. So we, in Cook County, we haven't had a sale of tax forfeiture in a number of years. There have been a couple of adjacent owner sales and things like that, but nothing in the last 3 years that I'm aware of. I think 2019 might have been our last tax forfeit sale where the property was sold to an adjacent property owner. So there's a number of issues there. I am a part of the Minnesota Association of County Land Commissioners, and this is primarily in northern Minnesota. There's not typically not land commissioners down in the south or in the metro or in ag land. They're handling their tax forfeitures typically through their auditor's office. But there's a lot of concern about these, what they call legacy parcels, that a lot of these were forfeited back in the 1930s. And one of those attachments that I had attached to the packet was just kind of a brief history from the Association of Land Commissioners of how all these county managed forest lands came to be. And there's roughly 2.8 million acres currently. So there's a lot of concern about how those properties will be dealt with now that this ruling of Tyler versus Hennepin County has come out. Is there potentially going to be claims from a property that was forfeited 90 years ago, and the counties are still managing and actively have a revenue stream? Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but there's timber harvesting, there's mineral leases on tax forfeit lands. There's a lot of different revenue streams that some of these other counties, St. Louis County in particular, they're managing these legacy parcels of tax forfeited land, and they're a little bit concerned about how the new laws as they're being written will address those properties that were forfeited so long ago. We have actually received a couple of data requests in Cook County, one from an attorney, well, for all of them from an attorney so far, but they're essentially seeking, for the most part, back 6 years, any forfeitures that have occurred in the last 6 years. Brady is currently compiling a list. Now, Hennepin County more recently has submitted a data request from us, and they're looking for going back over 15 years. They want to go back to 2005. What I understand is that there's this class action lawsuit that has been filed. Well, they're asking for class action status, but it's kind of unique where it's class action in two ways, where the respondent could potentially be 87 counties in the state of Minnesota, and typically in class action it's a number of petitioners. It's the other way around. So this class action lawsuit could potentially have thousands of petitioners listed and also 100 respondents. So Hennepin County is seeking the information. They want to address this all at once and not have things come back after this court case plays out. So Brady, I think last week, got the request from Hennepin County looking back 15 years. they sent us a spreadsheet where they want, columns filled out, and, they're looking for anything that was forfeited and how it was disposed, even if it's still under county ownership. So, who knows what may come of that, but it's something that we definitely have to be cognizant of, that there are claims out there for people who, whether it was them or a ancestor or something that was forfeited, they potentially have a claim to those excess funds above and beyond what was owed in back tax. So there's a lot going on there in Cook County. I think we are in a little bit better position than some of these other counties because we haven't had a revenue stream from tax forfeiture other than any sales that we've had that I'm aware of. We're not actively managing a timber program. We aren't leasing. We don't receive royalties from leases on mineral rights or anything like that. So effectively, we have an inventory of tax forfeited lands. Real estate values are about as high as they've ever been. So the county is certainly sitting in a better position than some of these counties that are relying on annual revenue streams from managing forests. But I do think it's in the interest of the county commissioners to kind of look at some of these other northern Minnesota counties and sympathize or understand and kind of stand with them, and that these legacy parcels that were forfeited, 80, 90 years ago, if the counties could continue to manage and have those revenue streams. At the end of the day, the county isn't necessarily benefiting from those revenue streams. In fact, all of the taxpayers are. There's an allocation of those revenue streams that, it goes some to the schools, some to the local taxing districts like the townships, and then some to the counties. So if those revenue streams do go away, then it's effectively going to have to come out of levy. So the counties have only managed these lands to help reduce some of that levy burden. So I wanted to give that update, and I know, talking with the Association of Land Commissioners, which is all northern Minnesota, they're worried that Hennepin County is, and the metro in general, is kind of creating legislation that would effectively address the Tyler ruling, and they may not have as much to consider with these legacy forest parcels. So if you're talking with other county land commissioners in some of these other northern Minnesota counties, you have to kind of understand where they're coming from and the position that their land departments are in with this Tyler ruling. It would be great if there was legislation that could address, moving forward, the Tyler decision, while also allowing these counties to continue to have a revenue stream and benefiting those other taxing districts.
Commissioner White.
Bob, I attended the Northern County Land Use Coordinating Board, and they were discussing the Tyler versus Hennepin thing, and one, not knowing what's going to happen, but should it continue and not be favorable to the counties, then they were seriously considering putting forth the proposition that the state should pick up the tab because the counties will be bankrupt, to help pay for whatever ends up happening at the end.
Yeah, and I'm not real familiar with how much liability the state may be taking on. For the most part, anything that's tax forfeited is going to be held in trust for the counties by the state of Minnesota. But I don't know how that will play out with, there's been some talk about with the deed tax registration that the state does collect a portion of, should some of those funds be allocated to these claims.
Other questions or comments? Well, thanks for updating us. Very important, and we'll be visiting with our colleagues at AMC, and I'm sure be learning a lot more in the upcoming months.
Yes, and once there is some direction, I guess, from the legislature on how tax forfeitures should be handled moving forward, then I think we can again pick up and look at our list and talk about how we want to approach the disposition of some of these properties. I know certainly there will be pressure to dispose of some of these properties, especially if there are still heirs or decedents or previous owners who now may have a claim at some of those excess funds. They're probably going to get a hold of us and say, hey, sell the parcel that was forfeited back in whatever year it may be, and let's move on with this. In particular, we've had a couple of parcels that are tax forfeited where we've had a lot of interest. There, one in Tofty that, I don't know if I've received 20 or 30 calls on it over the years, people trying to buy it. And in fact, about 2 weeks ago, the president of the homeowners association came into my office and he said, hey, I'm just wondering, what's the status of this lot? Is it ever going to be sold, or is it ever going to be put back into the tax rolls? And I said, well, currently everything's on hold, but at this point in time, we're not disposing of anything. We need to see how the legislature deals with this. And he said, well, I did just file a lien in over $5,000 of back HOA dues on the property. So, we have some things to deal with. Certainly a number of tax forfeit parcels that we're going to have to start looking at. How do we dispose of that? And if it is a sale, where is the excess revenue? How much of it is there? And how do we track down the person who may have a claim at that? And that may be something that's addressed in the new legislation. They've talked about putting the obligation of filing a claim for those excess funds with the taxpayer. So, the county wouldn't, if that was the case, the county wouldn't have to go seek out heirs or previous owners who had an interest. It would be on them to, within a certain time frame, come and say, hey, I have a claim at the revenue or the excess funds here. And, we talked about it too, that a lot of times in these forfeitures, it wasn't just unpaid taxes. There may be an underlying mortgage that needs repayment. There may be mechanics liens. There may be other kinds of secured interests that effectively they would also have potentially have this option to file a claim with the counties and saying, hey, I'm entitled to some of those excess revenues and excess funds. And if that's the case, I would imagine that the previous taxpayer they're going to be last in line at any excess revenue, that these other debitors and creditors would be entitled to money before them. But who says, what order do you go in? Who gets their money and who doesn't?
And I think I've asked this before, but would we have to sell? Do we have to sell?
I think that the Tyler ruling, let's say we determine there's a property that we want to put a fire hall on, and it serves the public better by putting it to a public use. I think there is still a claim, in that Tyler ruling, they said you can't take more than what was owed. I can't remember the analogy that the judge or the Supreme Court gave, but if we are taking for a public use, did we give them appropriate compensation for that taking? So even if we didn't sell, there is still potentially a claim of the takings.
Really, it would have to be at the time of the forfeiture, a property valuation, right? So it'd be a historical valuation, and we'd have to compensate that. I'm just thinking
Yeah, I mean, land prices have escalated, and so that's not fair.
And we've had this conversation within our group of land commissioners, and I have this unique position where I'm the only land commissioner in that group that actually is a county assessor. And the perspective that I bring to it is a little bit unique, and they actually really appreciate some of that. But they had talked about that very thing, that you have to determine the value at the time of forfeiture, when the person lost all opportunities to say, I want to keep my property, I'm going to become current. When that goes away, that's when the taking happens. That's when they've lost their right to redeem. And when you look at some of these legacy parcels, it's going to be difficult to establish a value of 1935. But also, something back, like with the Geraldine Tyler case, the forfeiture happened in 2012 and the sale happened in 2014, and there was appreciation between there. So that is something that, you know, either the lawmakers are going to have to specify or the courts are going to have to adjudicate and establish what is that date. There's been a lot of talk that maybe the county assessor is going to have to do a valuation on the date of forfeiture because our values are always January 2nd. Now, we can kind of index between 2 points, but another county assessor had actually brought up that as an appraiser, you are supposed to be unbiased with no vested interest in the valuation of a property. And as a county assessor, if we're talking about, you know, this is what we forfeited, this is the property we forfeited on, what is it worth on the date of forfeiture? Well, is there going to be a claim from the taxpayer that the county assessor came up with a lower number because of the implications of the repayment or the payback? So how do we approach that value on the date of forfeiture? I don't know if, I mean, if you were to hire an appraiser, there's going to be a lot of expense involved. I mean, forfeitures are going to become very expensive. That's clear with this ruling. And the courts are going to have to deal with a lot of issues related to that. But I agree 100% that the forfeiture happens at the time that their ability to redeem goes away, and that's the value that on that day, that's what they may be entitled to if there is excess revenue. And I think the group of land commissioners are all on the same page with that as well. But it's that establishing value on the date of forfeiture is how do we come up with that? You know, that's where it's not a very clear picture.
But there's a real documentation of what real estate or property is going for. I mean, the realtors would say, well, no, back then that building was worth 75 and then that's what it was worth. You couldn't, it would have been 75 to 85,000 depending. And so you'd have to have a little range, but there'd be no way that you could say, well, it's 120.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 2 years later, is that, well, that's 2 years later.
Mm-hmm. And the only way to really know what something is worth is to find out what it sells for. And so if your sale is happening a year or two after the forfeiture, then you can't really say, well, that's what it was worth a prior year. We all see it where our assessments are not, people don't pay exactly what the assessed value is. They pay more, they pay less, it's all over the place. We do our best to target a market value, but there's margins of error with the assessment. So I think the only true way to establish the value is to have a certified appraiser come in and give you a value as of a specific date. That is something that could hold up in court or actually at least be argued in court if there was ever a claim, you know, against it. But a certified appraiser is going to give you a value as of a specific date where, you know, Dave, if we look at your assessed value for 2023, that's January 2nd, 23, and it's based off sales from 22 to 21. So if we're looking at your value today, let's say you were forfeited on today, that 23 assessment is not going to be, in my opinion, the most reliable number. But it's a mess, and you know, I applaud Hennepin County. They're working with a professor to try and draft a recommendation to the lawmakers on how do we proceed with forfeitures moving forward. I don't believe they're addressing anything looking back. Effectively, those looking back cases would be resolved through lawsuits.
As they come.
Yep.
Lots of rabbit holes.
There's a lot of rabbit holes. The one thing is that, you know, because Cook County was kind of, you know, we weren't really taking a whole lot of action with tax forfeiture. It kind of puts us in a little bit of a better position than some of these other counties. Some of these other counties have a huge issue to deal with. Whereas Cook County, you know, we have an inventory of tax forfeiture, and I guess at this point it's just a matter of seeing how the legislature deals with the issue. So But we don't have a, you know, there's not a budget line item of revenue that we've been relying on these past 5 years that now we have to put off. I think in St. Louis County, they had a $4 million, roughly a $4 million revenue stream last year off their tax forfeitures. And this year, that number is probably zero, or moving forward for '24. So that's a big shift.
Well, thanks for the update, and I'm sure there's much more to come and many more questions.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and I will keep the board updated as I learn information, but really, I think until we see a bill, we kind of don't know. Last year during session, there were a couple lawmakers that put bills forward, and they were very basic. It was, I think one of the bills, it added one sentence to the current statute, and it said, you know, after forfeiture, all excess revenues go back to the previous owner. And it was that basic and simple, but it doesn't address second or third lien holders. You know, how to, let's say you have a $800,000 mortgage and you decide, I don't want to pay that mortgage. I'm going to let the county forfeit on it. And the county is going to give me my $800,000 equity, and the bank just is left with the holding the bag. So you have to deal with that in statute. You have to deal with the second lien holders. And some of those bills that were proposed last year had no consideration of that.
All right, well, more to come. Thank you very much. Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, I wanted to echo the thanks, just your advocacy and the level of detail and just the breadth of experience that you bring to these conversations at statewide is so valuable for us as our organization and community, and also the state, clearly. So just thank you.
Yep, thank you. And I will continue to, I have a role on the legislative committee with the Association of Assessors, and that does, you know, bring me into the circle of information that, you know, a lot of assessors probably don't have. So it's really nice to be that close to the legislative issues.
Win-win-win, huh?
Yeah.
Question, if somebody doesn't pay their mortgage, I mean, and they don't pay their taxes, they might not be paying their mortgage either, right? And so it's stipulated in your mortgage, you know, it would go back to the bank.
Most mortgages, they do escrow for the property taxes. So, you know, you're, that's why a lot of times your mortgage payment will change year to year, because the taxes have either gone up or down. So most lenders have covered that base, that if you stop paying the property taxes, they're going to deal with it. They're going to pay those property taxes. They don't want to lose their interest in the property. Currently, in the laws, the way they're written right now, if a bank didn't cover that property tax liability and the taxpayer wasn't making the payments on the property taxes, if it went through forfeiture, the bank would lose all of their interest in that. They would.
So that's where.
A forfeiture actually wipes all debts clear currently. Whereas, like, if you have a foreclosure, that doesn't wipe out mechanic liens. So the forfeiture was kind of like the end all. If the taxes weren't paid and the county forfeited on a property, no one has a claim to that property. The county takes clear title. So it's there's definitely going to be some new laws written, and it's going to be a big change with the process of collecting taxes on properties.
It's really hard to respond, right? Like, there's just so many aspects of it, and we're such a small organization, and it's such a big mess.
Well, just think
But
about our
having-
colleagues in St. Louis County and
Yeah.
the potential impact on all the people living there. I mean, it's huge.
I'm just thinking too of, well, who knows? I was just thinking of 2008 and just
Yeah.
all the foreclosures, and I don't know how much forfeiture. I'm assuming there's probably forfeitures too at an unprecedented rate then, but I don't know. But like you said, maybe all those foreclosures had escrow, so maybe not, but what a mess.
Yeah. Yeah, and from what I understood with one of our meetings with the St. Louis County, it wasn't the county attorney, but one of his assistant county attorneys, he had talked about the look back on something like this, typically it would be a wrongful takings, and that's a 6-year statute of limitations. So, you know, we may not be looking back at these properties that were forfeited 80, 90 years ago, but who knows? You know, I think at this point, if the county is still holding on to the property, there may still be a claim, even if the forfeiture was 90 years ago.
Yeah. I can see that.
Interesting.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time this morning, and we have some minutes of airport and personnel and highway. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Beautiful day to paint.